The joint
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to be here, to come to be present this morning. The committee appreciates your efforts to be responsive to the work that we're trying to get done here. I'd like to state that the purpose of this meeting is to continue the inquiry into the operations of the National Quarries Company Limited and to determine its effectiveness at fulfilling its mandate by maintaining quality of product and stability of supply. I want to be clear that the role of this committee is to examine the issues that have been raised, that have arisen based on National Quarries' written submissions and their oral responses regarding the question that we would have provided, we would have raised at the last hearing. And secondly, to help. This committee is here to help National Quarries in improving its operations and resulting in a more efficient and effective organization. This meeting is being broadcast live on the Parliament Channel 11, Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, and the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView. Viewers and listeners can participate by sending comments relating to today's engagement with National Quarries Company Limited via email to parl101@ttparliament.org or on our Facebook page at facebook.com/ttparliament or on our Twitter feed at ttparliament. I would like now to invite the officials present to invite themselves, to introduce themselves to the members of the committee. Please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ulrich Warner, and I'm the chairman of National Quarries Company Limited.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mustaq Mohammed, and I'm the CEO of National Quarries Limited.
Good morning, everyone. Glenn Stephen, Chief Financial Officer, National Quarries Company Limited.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Raymond Hackett, Chief Operating Officer, National Quarries Company Limited.
A pleasant good morning to all. I'm Selwyn Lashley, Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries.
Good morning. Indira Ramkisoon, Senior State Counsel, Legal Department, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries.
Good morning. I'm Monty Bihari, Director of Minerals, Ministry of Energy.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite the members of the committee to introduce themselves, beginning on my extreme left.
Morning all. Wade Mark, member.
Adrian Leons, member.
Lester Henry, Vice Chairman and member.
Morning, Fazal Karim, member.
Brigadier General Ansel Antoine, retired, member.
Good morning. My name is David Small. I'm the chairman of this committee. Just the housekeeping note, I'd like to remind all persons to, if anybody has cell phones, to keep them either on vibrate or on silent, and also to please, when you're speaking, to address your questions or responses through the chair, and to remember to engage the mic when you're responding. I'm going to ask now for brief opening comments, firstly from the chairman of National Quarries, followed by the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Energy, to give us a few brief opening remarks. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. At the last session, there were several questions that were asked by the committee, and National Quarries Company Limited, we were pleased to address those questions and return the written answers to the committee. We trust that those answers would suffice, but we are willing to answer any additional questions based on the submissions that we have made. Thank you very much.
Mr. Lashley.
Yes, good morning, Chair, and thank you. Similarly, the Ministry of Energy received a list of questions from the committee. We responded, and we hope the responses treated adequately with those questions. But nevertheless, if there are any additional questions or clarifications, we are here today to treat with any issue that would arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lashley. And as the chairman of this committee, and I want to say on behalf of the committee, this committee is completely satisfied and pleased with the way in which National Quarries responded at the last hearing. We also put on a record, given the history of what has happened in other places at other times, that all of the requests for information requested by this committee, both from National Quarries Ministry, the responses were complete and met all of there was nothing outstanding. So what the committee wishes to place on record its thanks and its appreciation for demonstrating your understanding how serious this committee approaches its work, and that when we request information, you all treated it with that level of seriousness, and your responses were full, complete, and right up to what we're expecting. And on that note, I want to personally say that is what we're expecting from entities, and we're very, very pleased with that. So now, I would like to begin today's session, as those of us who have been here the last time would have recalled that we had a previous session a couple of weeks ago, and I think that several matters came up and arose. And one of the key things that has arisen is the fact that National Quarries has had a difficult history. It's had a difficult history. I think it's that everyone understands that. And that the road going forward is not necessarily going to be smooth. I think everyone understands that as well. Even this committee understands that. We don't expect that you'll just sit there and in 2 years it's going to turn around and be profitable just like that. It requires effort. What we want to be sure about is to be able to understand how we can help you. How, in the things that the company is doing, and in terms of how the ministry sees itself as being able to support the company, how can this committee help you in terms of getting to a place where National Quarries is a company that we can be consistently proud of. And I'm very careful with my words, consistently proud of, to be able to deliver product in a way in which everyone is happy, there's no issues with quality, there's no issues with timeliness, and is able to pay its dues to the relevant authorities in terms of royalties and taxes due to the state. Because after all, you're a state entity, and you're owned by the state, and it's expected that at the very least, state entities will be paying their share. Otherwise, what you have is a situation where if the state company doesn't pay, then others will decide, well, perhaps, we don't have to either. So good. Those are my few brief opening remarks. I want now to address to the chairman. Mr. Chairman, since the last inquiry, you would have recalled several questions about the way in which the entity, National Quarries, in which you are the chairman of, is doing its work. We have quite a bit of documentation here from you, one from the first hearing and also from the second. I want to ask, I want your assessment, because I've looked at your draft strategic plan. I've seen what I consider to be, and here, let me be clear. I appreciate that the current board and management are positive, but I look at some of the projections and I am not sure if they're practical or realizable. So I look at the suggestions for increasing sales of limestone by 300%, and I'm just looking at some of the things in there, and I am not sure, I don't have the supporting information that tells me how you hope to realize some of these gains. There are several issues in there that I think that while I like them generically and I understand your thinking, what I'm trying to I want something granular in terms of what is going to drive the company to be able to deliver these types of increases. And then, before I close this first question, I note that you have a people engagement issue in the company, where I'm seeing that absenteeism or punctuality is a number that is a challenge. I don't want to put all the number, but if you have one or four staff arriving late every day, then that's a problem. That's a problem for any business. Quarter year staff almost. So those are things I want to understand. One, in terms of your projections, so how are you going to move your production to where you want it to be? What is your assessment of the company's ability to do that? What are the resources required, and what is your view of the time frame? And then some of the people issues, because there are several other people issues, including some litigation matters that I will ask about later on. I sense that the company has some people issues. And one of the things in companies, when you see that people issues, is you see issues with people leaving the company frequently. You see issues with punctuality and other issues. There's a reason these things happen. It's because there's some issue inside of the company regarding how the people management is going. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to, if you start to give us some responses on those questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would first like to address the issue in terms of the production that we are projecting within the strategic plan. I also want to state immediately that the board met with the executive and reviewed the document because it was a draft, and the board has been able to accept the plan and also, make some changes to it. And that happened only at our last board meeting. So the written up document is not yet ready, but it will be ready soon enough, and we'll be willing to provide you with the final copy of that.
We'd appreciate that.
With respect to our production capacity, when the board came into being in the November of 2015, we had what was essentially a high production period. And that's because there was a tremendous amount of road works going on in Trinidad and Tobago. It was the year 2015, which was a significant year, and I don't need to go into why 2015 was a significant year. But there was a tremendous amount of road paving, so that the production within National Quarries was quite high. 2016, 2017 almost went to nothing, meaning that the extent of the requirement for the limestone that we produce was not as heavy. In fact, every day when we track our production figures, you would see sand and gravel would be making the target or just under the target, but in terms of the limestone quarry, the targets were not being achieved. And that's simply because the extent of roadworks were extremely small and in some cases almost non-existent. So you move from a high to almost zero. The board, looking at what is happening, and we look at the trends in the economy, what is happening in the economy, and we look at the projections that were provided by the relevant state sector companies. And those projections indicated that certain roadworks would take place, plus we had direct involvement of our line, where the line was saying to us that the guidance from the directorate is that you have to be ready, since no foreign exchange would be given for the importation of limestone. So that we looked at what the providers of the implementation arm of the government were saying, and they said, look, we need X, all right? And we based on that. Now, we did not take the position that National Quarries is the only supplier.
Okay.
We took what we call a very determined guesstimate of how much can we supply based on our production capacity. And we actually went another route where we said, if it is at the moment, this is the requirements, can we do this with the current plant? And this is where we went into a public-private partnership where National Quarries, through a public tender, asked for people to come in to assist us with the crushing. And as a result, after putting that into the newspaper and people making submissions and having all of this reviewed in a very transparent manner, following our procurement process, we were able to appoint someone. So that in terms of what we are looking at, in terms of our production capacity, there are two things. One, we are looking at increased plant capacity because we have actually looked at the plant that is going to come. We have seen it operate. Our people visited it. We also looked at the demand, and this is straight demand from the implementers of government's road working projects. With respect to our capacity, that is our people capacity, one of the issues that we found when we came into the organization is that morale was fairly low. Issues like, where is the company going? That was not something that was known to the rank and file. So the board took the position that we would implement first what we call the annual corporate meeting, which is now part of the whole structure of the organization. And what did we do there? we explain to people this is where we are, because 99% of our employees had never had the opportunity to look at the financials of the organization and see where we are. In fact, they thought that it didn't matter whether they come or not, their salaries would be paid, government would just send in the money. They were unaware that National Quarries Company Limited, as a state enterprise, gets absolutely no subvention from the government of Trinidad and Tobago. Employees were totally unaware of that. The morale being low and the general work attitude were what we would consider to be one for improvement. And so we had to take several actions to treat with that. One of them, of course, is leadership by example. And when we speak of leadership by example, we talk about if the CEO came into work at 2 in the afternoon, which was the normal thing, or the CEO called a meeting for 10 o'clock, and that meeting didn't start until 1, and in the meeting, the CEO spent 45% or 90% of the time speaking on a telephone, then who really cares about what is going on there? And I'm just using that as an example to suggest that that kind of behavior had to change. As the chairman of the company, I remember my first board meeting. 9 o'clock is 9 o'clock, and it's not a second after 9. And the board meeting started at 9, and we had a situation where a key employee came into the meeting 40 minutes later and said, oh, I have a couple of calls to make. And we had to ask him, well, if that is how you lead, then what is going to happen in the organization? I'm pleased to say, Mr. Chairman, that there has been significant improvement in terms of so many areas of the culture of the organization. And one of the pillars that we speak about in the strategic plan is really that issue about transformational change within the organization. On the occasions that I go there, you know, it's strange now that I drive in and the car park is full. Previously, you drove into the car park and you have about 3 cars. Now that is not the case. Our CEO arrives in the organization. We start work at 8, and he's there 6:30. So that when the organization top leadership operate that way, and when actions are taken, you know, to treat with, you know, issues of tardiness, then you find it's a change around. And mind you, it was not an easy process, Mr. Chairman, because change takes place over a period. And in some cases, some people are unwilling to accept the change, and that is when we have to take decisive action. But there has been significant improvement in the whole culture, in the productivity, in the way in which we engage with people, because they are now seeing that if we don't do that, this organization can see its demise. And not so much by a government taking the decision, you know, it's by the people within the organization, you know, helping the organization to go in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one question for the ministry. 2 questions, actually. Perhaps the permanent secretary, and I suppose it's the lead legal officer can assist. At the last hearing, we found out that there was or there is a situation where you have many quarries, including National Quarries, who have requested renewals of their licenses. And this committee, and it seems that this process has been protracted. So what this committee wants to understand is, what is the process in the ministry? What is the turnaround time? Because from where the committee sits, we expect there's a different process for someone applying for a new license as opposed to someone who's already operating. Because we have a situation where very few operators now in the country are operating with a license. I think someone drew the reference that if you go down the street and you drive your car and your permit is expired, you get a ticket. There's no in-between. There's no compromise. You can't drive without a valid permit. But we have a situation where we have probably the majority of the quarry industry operating without a license in different stages, whether their license is in the process of being renewed or they're now applying for a license. We still don't get how someone could be applying for a license and be operating. So we need to get some understanding from the ministry. One, why is it taking so long? What is the process in the ministry? Does it require, we are not sure, because it seems that there's a protracted process. And then the other question I have, specifically to the legal counsel, is the current legislative framework for the mineral sector. I want to get a sense, the committee wants to get a sense as to whether or not your view of whether or not that affords the ministry as the entity that is charged with administering the sector. Is there enough inside of there, including the Minerals Act, to really run this sector efficiently? And I know there's an issue of protection of the workers. I'm well aware of the issues. But this committee wants to understand the current existing framework, legal framework. In your view, does it represent a framework that allows, if it works properly, or does it require or do you have suggestions for ways in which it could be improved? So that this way committee understands there's challenges, and we are here to help. But the only way we can help is if we understand the problem. Right now, we hear any problem, we don't understand the problem. So I'll start with the Permanent Secretary regarding the issues with the period. What is the process in the ministry for renewing, and what is the length of time? And similarly, if someone is applying for a quarry for the first time, is it that you give them a provisional approval to operate? We have no idea how it works. So we're trying to get information here. So, Mr. Permanent Secretary, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And we have actually two of the key officers in the application and approval process here with us this morning. Suffice it to say, I share your sentiments that, in fact, we're far from the preferred position where we have licensed operators operating under bona fide licenses. But we all recognize that we are going through a period of transition where we want to implement proper licensing engagement and a framework under licenses that have very specific terms and conditions that allow for improved administration in terms of the monitoring, the reporting, and of course the collection of revenues, as you quite rightly pointed out. So what I would like to do with your permission is I'll ask the Director of Minerals probably to walk us through the process for treating with applications. I noticed one of the questions you asked dealt with new entrants as opposed to existing unlicensed persons who are going through the process. So probably you might want to treat with that as well.
Bihari, you have our attention.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Pierce. Yes, Chairman, the two categories we are concerned with here are those who are operating with expired licenses and they are in the renewal process. And the second category are those who have submitted new applications. Now, those who have submitted new applications are not allowed to operate. So it's not simply that somebody can submit an application today and start operating tomorrow, who has never operated before and has no history of operating. The persons who are operating...
I stick up in. Sure. So everybody who's now applied for a new license, none of them are operating?
No.
Well, okay. No. Well, that is what I want to be clear, so that they are not supposed to, but they are.
No, they're not.
They're not?
They're not. And if they are operating, then enforcement action is usually the next step to prevent persons from simply putting in an application. We have seen situations like this where persons would simply drop in an application form with no supporting documents and then start operating based on information they would have received from whoever is advising them out there. The persons who are operating now, and we are licensing or relicensing, are persons who held applications in 2006, which were renewed in 2007, and some of them were renewed further in 2008, 9 or so for 5-year licenses, as well as persons who received new applications, new licenses in 2011 for 5 years, which expired. So those persons who are operating now are considered to be the bona fide persons who would have gone back in history, some of whom would have predated the Minerals Act in 2000. Others would have been recognized around 2003, 2004 as bona fide operators who had been in the industry. But those are the persons who are operating now, and they are the people who we are relicensing or in the renewal process. Persons who submit applications now, brand new applications, are not authorized to operate. They are not encouraged to, and if they take it on themselves to do that, then they are acting illegally, and we take the necessary steps to deal with that.
I just want to be clear, Mr. Bihari, so that those persons who have new applications, you say come and drop it in, that to your knowledge, are any of those parties operating?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Yes. The application process is laid out in the Minerals Regulations 2015. There are 5 types of licenses that the minister can issue under the Act. We focus basically on 2 main types: the mining licenses and the processing licenses. Mining licenses for mining activities and processing licenses for processing activities. Persons who are operating in the renewal process may either be mining alone, mining and processing, or processing alone. So there are 3 basic types of activities that takes place out there. Applications are done in accordance with the guidelines as set out by the ministry, which flows straight out of the Minerals Act and Minerals Regulations. And those guidelines are detailed with a flowchart, and it's available on the ministry's website for anyone who wishes to have access to it. That information is public information. It's available on the ministry's website. And that details the entire process, the requirements to be submitted in addition to the application form. There are title documents, there are survey plans, mine design plans, processing plans, certificate of environmental clearance, town and country planning approval, water abstraction permits, and a host of other company core documents.
I want to focus you. So the entities that have held licenses that are in a renewal phase, what is the time period for a renewal? I suppose that you have a license, so as you said, for 5 years. I would like to understand if at the end of that 5 years, National Quarries comes and submits a renewal, how long does it take the ministry to issue a renewal license?
It depends. If someone previously held a 5-year license, one of the terms of that 5-year license is that they are supposed to apply for a renewal within a certain time frame before the license expires. Once that application comes in, the application is treated by the Minerals Advisory Committee that makes a recommendation to the minister, who will then take it to cabinet whether to grant or refuse the application. When the application comes in, there's an application form and the supporting documents that I mentioned. All of
so let me be clear. Every single application for a renewal has to go for cabinet approval.
It goes before the Minerals Advisory Committee.
Mineral Advisory, who makes a recommendation to cabinet?
Makes a recommendation to the minister, and the minister would then take it to cabinet.
Proceed.
Yes. One of the challenges we have, this has been a major challenge for not just the Ministry of Energy, but the other regulatory agencies, including the EMA, Town and Country Planning, the Water Resources Agency, which are the 3 key agencies that have to give their statutory approvals prior to the issue of the license, is that applicants simply do not submit supporting documents, or when applicants are asked to provide additional information to those agencies and even additional information to the Ministry of Energy, they simply do not do so in a timely manner. And that is one of the reasons the applications simply cannot go forward. Now, built into the regulations in 2015 was a time frame within which an application would be valid. Once an application is submitted, if it is incomplete, the applicant has 90 days to complete the application, filling which, once that 90 days expires, the application lapses, and the applicant has to resubmit a new application. So there's a 90-day time limit. So if you ask the question, what is the time frame for processing an application? If an application is incomplete, it expires after 90 days, it lapses, and it's invalid. If an application comes in, it's complete, it goes before the Minerals Advisory Committee, usually a subcommittee that will review the applications, check to ensure that the submissions are valid and that there's substance to the submissions. I have personally seen things come into the ministry that are fluff, basically, things that have simply been put on paper and sent with no substance to support the application. So we see all sorts of different things coming in, and it's unbelievable sometimes.
Okay, Mr. Bihari, so you've helped us, because there seems to be a series of steps, and this is for renewals as well. It seems that there's a series of steps and a series of verification that needs to happen. Yes. It's not just, well, okay, you've been operating for 5 years, and I think you're a good operator, and we renew. There's a series of steps that the ministry has to go through.
That is correct.
And that the timeline for that could become protracted, depending on whether or not the entity supplies all of the required documentation or responds properly to the ministry's request for additional information.
That is correct. There's one additional challenge we have, and something that we mentioned at the last meeting, which we are trying to address now. Once these applications come in, it's a requirement under the Act and the regulations that searches be done. The applications, first of all, must be published in the newspapers, in 2 daily newspapers. It must be gazetted. Searches must be done for title to the parcel of land, for mineral rights, for company searches for bankruptcy, etc. And all these things are laid out under Section 13 of the Act and under Section 6 of the Regulation 6 of the regulations. So these searches and this due diligence has to be done prior to a decision being made or a recommendation being made by the Minerals Advisory Committee to the Minister to either grant or refuse the application. So the process is well laid out in the guideline documents. It's available on the Ministry's website, and there's a flowchart that shows the steps involved, which documents are required, which agencies are required to do what. So that information is public knowledge and it's out there.
Okay, Mr. Bihari. Ms. Ramki, forgive me. I had asked a question earlier about the existing legal framework and the ministry's comfort that the existing legal framework allows for effective management of the sector. Could you please help the committee?
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. There is, at this time, before the LRC, a bill. The name of that bill is the miscellaneous...
Just let the members know, all members of the public may not know what the LRC is.
My apologies. The Legislation Review Committee.
Thank you.
And there's a bill at this time before that committee. It's called the Miscellaneous Provisions Illegal Mining Bill.
Okay.
That bill has been, I would say, on the agenda for some time. And we have reached a point where further information was required from the ministry. And I started with that because that bill really represents the culmination of a lot of work that would have been done by an interagency committee tasked specifically with looking at the existing legislative provisions with respect to the mineral sector, assessing that and coming up with recommendations. It would have started around 2012 or so, 12 to 13, when we had quite an increase in illegal activity. So it was, at the time, it was the response of that administration and the minister in charge of energy and minerals for us to do this. That bill really focuses on enforcement. And it's called the Miscellaneous Provisions Illegal Mining Bill because it's not just touching the minerals legislation or the Minerals Act. It's also touching state lands and some other pieces, at least 5 or 6 other pieces of legislation. The committee tasked with doing this was really a legal committee, as I indicated, and the focus was on enforcement. And why was that? When we reviewed the minerals legislation, the act in particular, so for example, the Minerals Act, Chapter 6103, Part 4, it's headed in bold, enforcement. But when you look at what is contained there, we have 2 sections, 29 and 30. And the first one, 29, the side note talks about the taking of samples. 30 talks about the powers of the Director of Minerals to investigate. The enforcement component, so for example, when we compare the state lands legislation with the Minerals Act, and bear in mind, Chairman and members of the committee, the Minerals Act and the minerals regulations cover both state and private lands. And therefore, if we remember that, it would be the enforcement on both state and private. And therefore, to cover that private component, we have to look at the Minerals Act and the regulations and see whether we have the powers that can mirror what can really be done by the Commissioner of State Lands. So the powers of seizure, the powers of arrest, the powers of forfeiture, the powers to take this when illegal activity is found, to seize, to arrest the equipment, persons, the material, and then take it all the way through the courts. When we look at the state lands legislation, it had provisions for all of that. The minerals legislation that we had and what we are trying to work with at the ministry somehow did not contain very much. We had offenses created, and over the years we got improved, or increased, I should say, fines. And even imprisonment, we got that increased a couple of years ago. But it's not sufficient.
Ms. Ramke, soon you've helped us, because that is what I want this committee wanted to understand. What you're saying in a nutshell is that when you look at the current mining, the issue is the inability of the current act to allow for proper or effective enforcement of the act. And that there's a bill before the LRC looking at that, given the fact that someone somewhere along the line looked at the existing Minerals Act and recognized that there's gaps. So at least we understand that from the ministry's point of view, it's clear that the existing Minerals Act allows for the people who want to do illegal things, they can do it because they know that the enforcement part of the act is weak.
We're going to fall down there, and
yeah,
this is what we're trying
weak.
to fix.
So, because you see, we didn't know. So this is what we're trying to get information. Well, all right, so you've laid the framework for us, and you've helped us tremendously so that we understand now what the committee could, in terms of the things that the committee could recommend. Because while we all, it's a lawful society, we operate within the Act, we also recognize when the Act has weaknesses, and we need to take other actions to try to see if we can get proper people or persons to act in accordance with the spirit and the letter of the law. I now open the floor to Senator Mark. Senator Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I deal with some of the areas I wanted to, may I ask the senior legal officer to share with this committee when was that miscellaneous provisions illegal mining bill referred to the LRC? What year?
It would have been on the agenda since, I think, late 2015, 2016. It's been there for a little bit. Yeah.
Could you be more specific?
I did not.
And you could probably submit.
Yes, I certainly will. I certainly will submit that date. I did not work with that document. My apologies.
Would it be asking out of the ordinary for this committee to have sight of?
Oh, certainly not. Certainly not. That will be made available. Yeah. Surely.
All right. May I also ask, Mr. Chairman? I don't know if this is directed to the Permanent Secretary. Permanent Secretary, I have what is called the Auditor General's report for I think it's 2015, 2016. This report at that material time on page 53 indicated that there were only 103 operators when that report was tabled in Parliament. And if I can share with you the breakdown, they were saying that expired licenses 76, operating without licenses 19, operating with licenses 7, and new application 1, given a grand total of 103 at that material time. What you have provided to this committee 1 year later, or maybe 1 year and a few months later, is a scenario in which the number of new applicants or applications moved from 1 when this report was tabled in 2016 to now what I have here, 61. That's a massive mammoth rise in numbers from 1 application in the Auditor General's report to 61. Now, this must be a lucrative business. And when the chairman asked the director about these entities, and several of them, in fact, my estimation is that almost 85% of these new applications were on private lands as opposed to state lands. So I would like to, on behalf of the committee, find out from you whether these private operators, which numbered 1 in 2016 and now rose to 61 in 2018, does the director have material evidence to prove that these private entities are not operating? Because he has just indicated that you need a license to operate. But then why would we move from 1 to 61 if there is not an incentive, Mr. Chairman, that these people are receiving or getting to apply? So is there a division in your ministry that will really go out there and monitor these applications to ensure that there's no activity taking place on those lands? I just wanted to clarify that as a first.
I want to ask the director to answer that. As the guy rightly pointed out, it falls within the remit of the division that has that responsibility. Mr. Bihari.
Thank you, Pierce. Chairman, let me clarify first the numbers. They moved from 1 to 61. The minerals regulations came into effect in June 2015, and those regulations laid out the procedure for the application for licenses and included the entire list of supporting documents and the process, etc. Okay. Some of these persons who formed the 60 or 61 now, when the report was compiled by the Auditor General, did not have new applications under the new forms in. Okay. So they may have had an old application which predated the regulations, pre-regulation regime essentially, and that they were written to and asked if they were still interested to submit a new application to conform with the new form that came under the new regulations and to submit the new requirements. At that point in time, there may have been just one person when that data was collected who would have submitted under the new forms, under the new regulations. And since then, the numbers have increased. And that's why we see this increase. It's not simply new people just applying because the state of the industry now it's fairly slow. And to see an increase in 60 at this point in time does not really reflect the realities out there. This simply reflects persons who had applications before the regs went into effect under old, outdated forms, and they were asked to submit new applications once they were interested. I hope that, so they are transitioning into the new regulation system. The second question with respect to are we monitoring? And the answer is yes, and we have been working on increasing, as Chairman indicated, provisions for security for the staff to visit the fields. And we try to monitor as much as we can based on the resources available to us, as well as the security resources which are provided by the Trinidad Police Service to assist the staff members when they're out in the field. There are many challenges out there, and it is unsafe to send staff to some of the places where quarrying takes place in Trinidad. So we are monitoring. We also monitor complaints. If we receive complaints that persons have started operations, and in some cases, the Trinidad Police Service may receive complaints themselves, and they may actually monitor. We have recent cases where the Trinidad Police Service received complaints from residents. They monitored and they took enforcement action, and then they came to us and asked for assistance. So we have a situation like that, and I think somebody mentioned the driver's permit. Again, and it's maybe not the appropriate analogy here, but if you are driving a vehicle, the police doesn't have to go to the transport commissioner to ask who has a license. They can stop you and ask you to produce your license. Similarly, the Trinidad Police Service members can go to any operation in the country where someone is quarrying and ask that person to produce a license. And if that person does not have a license, they can take action, then they usually come to us.
Yeah, well, Mr. Bihari, as you are aware, the government has embarked on a highway from Komuto to Mantinela. And my inquiries have revealed that for the first 2 phases, they would need about 1.4 to 1.6 million cubic meters of aggregate. These private agencies that have applied not to mention those that are operating without licenses because their licenses have expired. Would you not agree with me that there's an incentive that has been triggered to allow these entities to ramp up their operations, even in the absence of a proper license being granted? And whether this Ministry of Energy, along with the police, do we need a special unit within the ministry to be out there 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, to ensure that the environment is not being destroyed by these criminal elements, that many criminal elements we understand are involved in this industry? And I just give an example of a trigger that could encourage them to go forward. So would you want to share with this committee, apart from what the legal counsel has indicated, any interim measures that you may want us to consider when we are submitting our reports? Because I say this against the background of the fact that we are in stringent economic times, and citizens are being asked to make tremendous sacrifices. And in doing so, they are being deprived of many fundamental basic services because of these sacrifices as a result of the crunch in the revenue stream. And here it is, we have hundreds of millions of dollars outstanding in royalties, in corporation taxes, in business levy, in green fund. And I really would like the ministry to tell this committee what is the rough estimation of the value of monies that we have foregone as a country between 2001 to the present time. And that is why I raise these matters, to get from you a sense of whether there are recommendations you would like to share with this committee so that we can recommend to the Parliament to take action so that monies that we are now being denied can flow into the consolidated fund and provide basic and essential services to the people of the Republic of TNT. These are some of my concerns, both the Permanent Secretary and your good self, sir.
Thank you, Pierce. Chairman, yes, thank you, member, for the comments and questions. I agree with you that we have to put in place security because of the nature of the industry. As Senior State Counsel indicated before, there's a miscellaneous provisions illegal mining bill before the LRC at this time, which addresses those concerns, the security needs for the ministry staff of the Minerals Division, as well as the monitoring of the operations outside, the intelligence gathering, the investigations, the prosecution, taking matters to the courts, etc. And those matters hopefully will be addressed in the miscellaneous provisions bill. I agree with you also that we need to collect the revenue, and we have taken steps to do that. In fact, we have increased the collection of revenue, mainly in the form of royalties and license fees over the past few years. The current figure I would have given at the last sitting, which indicated the amount we had collected, still stands. We are still updating and auditing the books of the other operators. What we have decided to do also, again, through the licensing process, because again, one of the requirements under the Act is that no person may be issued a license who owes royalties to the state. So we're using the licensing process and the renewal process. With certain exceptions, the minister may allow persons to enter into a payment plan, etc. But in general, no license may be issued if someone refuses to pay royalties due to the state, someone who has been operating. So an operator who is in the renewal process and is transitioning to get a new license has to pay that outstanding sum. What we recognize, based on the figure that we have before us, is that there are 21 operators who owe $1 million or more. And we have started focusing on those large debt owners, owers of the state, basically. As part of the licensing process, we hope to capture that revenue for the state.
Just to expand on some of what our director was mentioning, it's a combination, as you would, of strengthening the legislation, the enforcement provisions, the penalties if people violate, and of course within the framework of the new licensing framework, which is a lot more defined and rigid. We are moving to collect outstanding monies owed. We are moving also to ensure that compliance with respect to the manner in which operations are conducted, which I think is an important piece over and above the monetary piece, how people operate in harmony with the environment and their communities, to ensure that activities within this sector are conducted in a manner which demonstrates best practice. So that is the vision going forward. You're right, we are constrained by resources, but we are moving to ensure that we focus, as the director said, on the key areas which can bring in maximum returns back to the government and by extension to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago.
Mr. Chairman, one final in this round. Mr. Lashley, would you be able to indicate to this committee whether the ministry has done any rough estimates of the value of royalties, corporation taxes, green fund levy, business levy that we have foregone because of our inability and challenges that we face at your ministry and maybe at other agencies in properly monitoring, licensing people so that they can pay their royalties and their other taxes to the state? Is it over $1 billion over the last 18 years? Because they have not been paying since 2001, and we are now in 2018. So what is the rough estimated amount that is owed to the state that has been foregone? Could you share with this committee what the numbers could be?
Yeah, I don't have that number for the committee this morning. Certainly we've done some estimates. There were two areas I think you mentioned at the last sitting where in some situations there is a question over title, and in particular title to the mineral rights. So there may be people operating who are actually contesting the fact that in fact these royalties are owed to the state as opposed to private individuals. So there are some numbers that we have put together with respect to royalties. With respect to taxes, that's something which we would not have the direct information regarding, but certainly we can review what we have and provide something to the committee which would serve as some sort of indicator.
Yeah, and my final question here is this. The Auditor General has indicated, and this is again a question where we are trying to solicit from you how we can help you. That is the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. The Auditor General has indicated, not only in the oil and gas industry, which we are not mandated to address here, but in the quarrying industry, we depend on the extractors of aggregate to tell us, as a ministry, what is the amount of production they have addressed in the last month, the last week, the last fortnight, the last year. And the reason for that is because the ministry doesn't have the mechanisms in order to properly weigh and to monitor the extraction levels of our non-renewable, that is a scarce resource that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. And the question that I would like on behalf of the committee to clarify is whether the ministry, technically speaking, is weak in its ability to measure accurately production levels at each quarry, so you can have, and the country can have, accurate data. Not only that, you will be able to monitor properly royalties that we are entitled to and not depend on the whims and fancies or views of an extractor of the. This is what I learned from the Auditor General's report. And I also learned that from the ETI, that we do not have any measuring ability to determine what is the revenues due to us as a society. So could you clarify those two entities' position on the inability of the ministry to properly measure accurately production of aggregate in TNT? And what would you like us as a committee to recommend through your intervention to the Parliament to strengthen your ministry where there appears to be some limitations, deficiencies, challenges, and weaknesses?
Okay, thank you. Just, I think we touched on some of this on the last occasion where we indicated that, in order to ensure we have a robust system for getting accurate quantification, involves the employment or the engagement of technology by way of use of drones in order to do the geological surveys, which at the end of the day, you need to have checks and balances over time to ensure that over a piece of licensed acreage, what has transpired. Now, the historical is something which, in fact, you may have to do some measure of estimation. But certainly going forward, we are confident, in collaboration with the Office of the Commissioner of State Lands, that we are establishing a framework where we can accurately monitor the progress and the activity taking place on all areas that are under active operation in order to ensure that there's reconciliation of reported numbers, which operators are required to do or will be required to do under the new licensing format, where they have to submit returns. That reconciliation is going to be checked and audited against information obtained by the relevant agencies, both the Ministry of Energy and the Office of the Commissioner of State Lands, in order to accurately determine what is the proper quantity to be assessed against the individual operators. And in fact, that is going to lead to an accurate determination of what monies are due to the state. Right? So that's in a nutshell, what we're doing to improve that level of confidence in the accuracy of the information that we rely on to determine these things.
But at this material time, you would agree with both the Auditor General and ETI that the ministry does not have the capacity to properly and accurately measure production output of these quarries in the Republic of TNT. And you're looking forward to introducing new technology on the way forward. You would agree with both assessments?
Yes, certainly. At this time, because of the capacity, we, only in terms of certain operations we're able to do it, but certainly in terms of the implementation of that technology, we kind of have a broader coverage and more accurate coverage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Senator. Before I give the floor to MP Leons, I just want to be clear, Mr. Permanent Secretary. The operators who have requested a renewal, applied for a renewal, they are allowed legally to operate while that is in process?
Once a quarry is in active operation, and they are in the process of securing a license, a bona fide license under this new process.
I'm talking specifically with renewals.
Yes. But I'm dealing with it from the context. There are some renewals that are in respect of operations which would have lapsed and they're not in operation. Okay? But there are some with respect to active operators. Because we are monitoring the active operators and they are in the process of licensing, they are allowed to continue pending the finalization of that licensing process. I put a caveat, though, as director, I'm indicated in some instances, because there are issues of outstanding royalties, there's a precondition in there with respect to the issue of a new license, that in fact the outstanding royalties have to be discharged in a manner satisfactory to the minister.
Thanks very much. MP Leon, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, I was going to ask that, just to follow up on that, the persons that would have applied or for continuation, that is in some form of process, in terms of the royalties, is there provision for them to pay royalties on what they are currently doing without a license?
To answer that one.
For persons who are basically holding over, some of them are actually holding over from their existing licenses, so they are held under the same terms and conditions as the previous license they were issued. And for those who have been in the industry and had previous 1-year licenses and previous 5-year licenses, they are basically operating under the same terms and conditions of those licenses until such time their application is assessed. And if they are successful and they have paid all outstanding royalties, they would then be granted a new license. That intervening period where they are operating, they are still held to pay royalties because they are operating. The payment of a royalty is really tied to the extraction of a wasting asset. It's a non-renewable asset that belongs to the state. Where it belongs to the state, royalty has to be paid. So the answer to your question is yes. If the person is in the transition process and they are operating, for the benefit of operating, they owe the state money and they have to pay the state the money. And we are collecting that money.
Is there also a provision or a policy that if royalties are not paid, that you have the authority to shut down the operation? Yes?
Short answer, yes.
Right. So has this ever been enforced?
Not to my knowledge. I will ask the director if he and legal counsel.
Chairman, no, we have not enforced against persons who have not paid royalties. We are taking steps now to try to bring all those persons into the licensed legal regime, and in the process try to capture some of that outstanding revenue. At the end of the day, we are not trying to manage the mineral resources of the country. We don't want to simply shut down everyone. We'll shut down the entire industry, which would effectively shut down the construction sector in the country with all the unintended consequences that may have. What we try to do is assist operators, those who are in the licensing process, who are in the renewal process, and even those who are making new applications to come up to compliance, get their documents in order, etc. And we work very closely with them. We have quarry management officers who are assigned to a certain number of persons, and they try to assist these persons to get all their documents in as best as we can. So at the end of the day, we are not there to simply shut people down. We are there to assist, because the material that comes out of the ground is used for government's construction projects, housing projects, highway projects, everything else that we build. The material comes from the ground. So we don't take an approach where we are there to stop people for every little thing. It's basically a more partnership type approach we take. And we try to bring these persons who are in that transition process up to compliance so that it's much easier to regulate the industry.
I want to jump in. I have a challenge with that, Mr. Bihari. I understand the partnership type approach, but when one member of the partnership is abusing the other, you have to stand your ground. And this is part of this is from respectfully from where I sit. That I understand your role is not to shut down the industry, and you're trying to work with people. But when people are abusing your good nature, you can't sit for years upon years and allow them to abuse your good nature. So that I would have thought that at the very least, the ministry would have communicated to parties in writing, your license is in process, you owe these royalties, we would like you to provide us with a schedule of when you're going to provide these, and hold the threat over them that one of the penalties for not paying or meeting these requirements is that your license could be forfeited. Is this something that, I mean, I suppose that would be the last step. You would engage in discussions. But we have to be careful because the system that we have in Trinidad now is where sometimes people, because they sense a weakness in the system, they exploit it. And we have to demonstrate some strength. So I'm trying to understand. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that in addition to what you're doing, it could be strengthened a bit more. I see the Permanent Secretary is seeking my attention.
Chair, thanks. I was going to add right after the statements by the director that in fact, although we have been working with operators, we have in fact communicated with several regarding not only the threat of closure, but of course we first quantified the extent of the obligation that they have to the state. There are instances where the matters have moved, where they've contested the numbers, where in fact there is some question around title, and those are some ongoing issues. But certainly, I just want to put on record that if in fact people do not have a valid license, one, if there are outstanding royalties to the state and there is no plan in place or no arrangement in place for them to discharge that obligation in a reasonable way, that is subject, of course, to the agreement and approval of the minister, that in fact they will be shut down. So let me just put that on record, that is the law, and will be implemented as we go forward.
Chair, thanks. Now, we heard earlier about the bill that has been before LRC. Is it since 2012?
Not since 12. We had the commission.
Late 15.
Within the last couple of years, but I will get that exact information to the committee.
Okay. Now, this bill, I have a concern in that, based on the information we have here, the number of licensed operators has a total acreage of just over 300 hectares. And when we look at the number of unlicensed operators that I want to believe seeking renewal, it's around 3,000 hectares, which means that the quantity of licensed operators that we have is about 1/10 of what may be actually operating in the country. In addition, well, there's about another 500 hectares that are applying, which we're not sure if they operating illegally or not. So my thing is, if it is, and we're in a serious economic crunch here in the country, and the director said basically a lot of the supply for this is government contracts. So are we being so lenient that only 1/10 of the operators take us seriously, and that our backs are against the wall? Has this industry really held us up to the point where majority of the operators basically non-compliant? How do you respond to something like that?
I think there's one comment I would want to make to add to what was said that might bring some sort of clarity to why it takes so long and why we may have a lot of people on this list not yet licensed. Just to say that based on the law, there are several requirements. They're all very important. Some trying to balance the environmental degradation that would take place, together with ensuring that we have enough material that could service our different sectors that need it. These requirements are all very important, and the point is an applicant would place the application with us. They would do the form, they would pay the fee of $1,000 or whatever it is, but several of these requirements, they have to rely on approvals or a document from another agency. Mm-hmm. So you have the EMA, you have Town and Country Planning, TCPD, You have sometimes forestry. You have a lot of other agencies, and they have no control over that. We in the ministry, we do not have any control over it as well. But at the end of the day, they have to show that they are financially capable and that they are technically competent to do this work. And it's trying to balance all of this and to meet these requirements that it's delayed. It is delayed,
No,
and it's a fact.
I understand that. I understand the challenges in terms of being able to provide, but I'm saying in terms of an operator that basically operating, and we know the operators operating, so the impact to the environment still happening. They technically able because they're operating and they're providing services. The documentation may not be there. What I'm saying is, and I'm trying to get a sense as to what is the ministry's position in terms of having only 1/10 of this industry, legal aspect of the industry, if you want to say, that's so critical for our development in this country, and an area where we desperately need funds. That what is the ministry's position in terms of solving something like this? Because I mean, we speak about the challenges and even the security. In the last meeting, we spoke about having some understanding with national security, with the illegal minings, because of the risk and the dangers. You know, the director said, even monitoring this, there's not enough resources for staff, for their safety. I mean, we wouldn't want to send your staff out where you know there's risk. And all I'm saying is there's so much things that it appears that this industry has the country hijacked, and we allowing it because we need the minerals from them, and something doesn't sound right with that. It doesn't sound right, and it's a scary. Explaining that is kind of scary.
Permanent Secretary, please.
Yeah, let me just, I share your concern, member, but let me just put it in a little different context to a couple of the comments made, one, and the statistics that you're drawing some of the reference to. Now, Senior Counsel was indicating that there are requirements, and in fact, the quarrying activity has to be conducted in a large number of instances. These activities are conducted on acreage and in areas where there's competing use for the acreage. So she mentioned forestry, of course, due regard, not just the environmental impacts generally, but specifically in some cases with respect to water courses, water, the aquifers, etc. So we have a number of agencies which, when Director talked about collaboration and working with the applicant, a lot of the work is not only specifically with the applicant, but certainly with the other agencies who we recognize have an input to make with respect to the application. There's mention of the Minerals Advisory Committee, on which a number of these agencies are represented. And in fact, they have to review the application prior to making a recommendation to the minister. So certainly in instances where there are issues that arise in respect to any one of these areas, there is a process within the framework of the committee where these things are identified. And to the extent the individual agencies can flag an item that they need to treat with a particular applicant, they then can take it up with that applicant to move the process forward. So that's one of the areas. I just wanted to point out, though, that when you mentioned the statistics, a large portion of the acreage identified as unlicensed is actually acreage that is now being operated by National Quarries State Agency, and we're in the process right now of regularizing National Quarries. So although the statistics may appear to be huge in terms of the percentages, about, I think, over 50% of that acreage is, in fact, under the process of being licensed right now. And in fact, the sort of horror where you say it's unregulated or operated in a maverick manner, that is not the case with respect to that. The director mentioned we've identified, not just in terms of the royalties, but in respect of acreages, some of the key large ticket and large areas that in fact we are focused in our approach in terms of bringing these areas that are currently being allowed to roll over and to continue to operate into a firmly established licensed regime. And in fact, when that occurs, you will see large chunks of the acreage that is currently under the category of unlicensed moving into that area of licensed acreage. So that I am seeing that within the next year or so, 6 months to a year, we're going to be having a large chunk of these numbers migrate into the realm of the properly licensed and monitored and administered acreage going forward. So I understand your concern, I share your concern, but certainly we're moving quickly towards ensuring that we transition from what now is not an acceptable situation to one where we have most of the acreage under license.
I'm happy to hear that. The information I have here, National Quarries is just under a third of the amount of acreage. Okay. And the sand gravel.
Yes, sand and gravel and unlicensed, you've counted both of them.
Okay, so is it that in the near future, we will be able to follow up through the committee that we will be able to change the statistics on this in a significant way?
Very much so,
and
definitely.
have the rest of Trinidad and Tobago smiling.
Yes, indeed. I would, as part of the general population as well, would feel more comfortable having these acreages under proper licenses.
Okay, thanks, Mr. P.S.
Right, before I give the floor to MP Karim, I just have a quick follow-up. I noted in your response, Ms. Ramkisoon, that the license fee for quarries is $1,000. Is that correct?
That would be the application fee.
Application fee.
The application fee.
And what is the fee?
The other fee is based on the acreage.
It's based on the acreage.
That is going to be there's a formula.
All right,
Yes.
so that help us with a range.
You want to give an idea? I think Mr. Bihari would be able to give us a sense of, yeah. But we have had very huge amounts in terms of, if you can give an idea of the figures.
Yes, Chairman. The $1,000 Senior Counsel mentioned is for the application when it's submitted. The license fee, when a license is granted, is tied to the acreage for the parcel of land. So the larger the parcel, the larger the annual license fee, and it's paid on an annual basis, and it's calculated at $250 per hectare.
$250 per hectare. That sounds, pretty generous on behalf of the state.
Yes. What I'd like to add also, and just to wrap some of the thought around some of the questions that MP Leons mentioned. The persons who are operating on state lands we call state lands, or lands where the state owns the surface rights, as well as those who are operating on private surface rights, but where the state owns the mineral rights. So wherever the state owns the mineral rights, we collect a revenue, a royalty from those persons. We are also in discussion with the Office of the Commissioner of State Lands, and there are provisions under the State Lands Act and under the Minerals Act for the collection of surface rents or ground rents. For persons who are issued leases by the Commissioner of State Land for operating on the state lands, they pay ground rents. And for persons who are not issued leases but permissions, it is possible also to collect ground rents through the license. So we are looking at other ways to collect outstanding revenue that could be collected for the state.
I have one quick follow-up, and I'm aware of some of the other structures of the ministry's contracting systems. I know in some of your other contracting systems, you use something, you apply something called an annual administrative charge. What's the effect? That essentially covers the administration of the contract in terms of what the ministry has to do. And I think that, you know, where we are, that's something that I would like to put on the table there. I know it's probably not something in your current thinking, but certainly I am aware, probably from, you know, some previous experience, that there's an annual administrative charge, a flat amount, and the thinking behind that charge is that the ministry administratively, in order to make sure that this contract is kept relevant, we have an annual flat charge that every license holder pays. And I think that should be something that and depending on the discussion here, I think it's something that the ministry should consider, because you outlined a pretty tedious, long, drawn-out process in terms of renewals. And there's a cost to that. And the license application fee of $1,000 just doesn't seem to capture that. So I'm sharing that with you for your consideration. I am now giving the floor to MP Karim.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman of the National Quarries Limited, I don't know if I'm correct in saying that I probably heard you said that under your watch you may have had the highest levels of production. Could you indicate to us what year that was? And subsequent to that answer, will you be in a position to furnish us with the last 10 years of production levels?
Mr. Chairman, when I made the point about production, I said December was the highest production year. And the reason for that is the company had a policy.
December what year, sorry?
December of 2017. And the reason for that is the company had a policy where it would close the period just prior to the Christmas and after the Christmas. The board felt that that was not a good way to go, and what we could have done during that period was essentially continue production so that when the new year or January started, then we'd have production to meet the targets. So in discussion with the union and the employees, we were able to get agreement that there's no need for the organization to close. We could continue production. And so December of 2017 was the highest production year. Month that year.
So, and I was just asking whether you'll be in a position to give us some data for because you said it's over a period of 10 years. If you can give us the 10-year rolling figures prior to December 2017. So we can get a sense as to how it would have been articulated up to the December 2017
We produced those figures.
The second thing, I don't know if this is the chairman or the CEO. Well, I can start with the CEO's report, because I noticed in the document which was sent to Mr. Caesar, the secretary of our committee, dated January 10th, 2018. On page 5, you indicated some of your services which you were outsourcing. But I didn't see in those services, about 5 of them, where you indicated whether you're outsourcing your training services or your IT services or your legal services. Is that you are not outsourcing any training services? Or is it that is an error and an omission from the title which you have here, services being outsourced?
Yeah. With respect to the kind of training that the company needs, certainly the company cannot provide all of those services.
No, that's okay, I understand that. The question is really, I wanted to know, is on page 4 of the CEO's report. You have here, the question was, are any aspects of NQCL's functions outsourced? And on the following page, you gave 5 only. And I'm not seeing any addition to those 5, but I'm aware that you would have outsourced other services. Is it an error, or is it that? Can you give us an explanation? Pages 4 and 5. Because I'm leading up to another question, you see.
Mr. Chairman, yeah. Could you give us an opportunity to look at
sure.
it? But you can perhaps move on to the next question, or does the answer to
And
this
if you don't have the
question...
document, the answer here, you're always free to...
No, I want to tell you what I'm predicating my contribution on. It's really when you started on the last occasion with your desire to improve the capability, the capacity, and the productivity of the organization, which I'm sharing, and I'm really commiserating with it. So when my comments are really in terms of how do we move towards establishing a platform and a basis for competitiveness. And I had asked that question on the basis that maybe that was in error, omitted. It's not a big deal. I just wanted to know whether that was so. However, I wanted to pay some attention to the training plan that you submitted to us. When I looked at the training plan, it kind of behoves me to ask the question, did any training take place under your remit from November 2015 to December 2017? Did any training of any type, internal or outsourced?
There was some training, but to a large extent, the training was what you might call very rudimentary basic training that needed to be done, because part of the challenge with the resources that we have is that their levels are ones that we have to build upon. I'll give an example. The organization has leadership in which their capacity to lead is not where it ought to be, so that even in terms of the interaction between supervisory staff and the rank and file, it is not one that we see to be the best. As a result, some of the training that we have done would have attempted to address that, when the truth is we really needed to be a little more fundamental. I'll give you an example. We have done training on something called emotional intelligence. Now, that was done because interactions were not the best that they ought to have been. But quite frankly, if our supervisors, our leaders, were trained in what essentially is their role, what are the rules? What's the role of a supervisor? What's the role of a leader? And how does a supervisor impact and influence people to take action is different, so that in looking at the training and what needed to be done, we dealt essentially with what you might call some stopgap measures, as against putting together a full training plan that would have addressed the capability that we need. And when I speak about capability, we're talking about having an organization with the kind of capacity that can treat with our significant issues. We're talking about our mechanical issues, our operations issues, and of course our electrical issues. But all of that must come together in the context of how the organization is led to deliver those things. So that what we are saying is that, yes, we have done training, but it is not at the level that we could have begun to look at really building capacity.
Would you say that you have noticed, therefore, deficiencies in the existing complement of personnel among the 181, 160 plus 21?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to be brutally honest on that. But you also have to understand that when we speak here, as much as we would like our, our Joint Select Committee to help us, we also have an organization that we have to continue to lead. And whatever we say here, we have to recognize that it has an impact on the people back at home, so to speak. I would like to suggest that our staff are doing the best that they can within the context of their ability to deliver. And as much as we can build capability, and how are we doing that? We have people who are retiring. We have people who would have been separated from the organization for one reason or the other. What we've been doing is we're saying, look, we need to get people here with the right training and qualification, the mechanical engineering technician's diploma, the process operations, the electrical, what we call the triple E. That is where we want to go, because our staff are essentially people who are homegrown, and they do not have, at this point in time, that capability of which we speak. But we recognize that they have made significant contribution to that organization. So all that we seek to do is to build on that competence. But what we want is of a higher level, but we can only do so as we transition the organization.
Well, I understand that, and I mean, I am one of those who also believe quite firmly that education, schooling, and certification might be different things. And it has to do with the performance of the job and the competencies. But I was going in the direction where, because I recognize the fact that you will have people who have been there for a number of years, many of whom may not have had the certificates, but many of whom can perform creditably. And therefore, you might engage in an apprenticeship type system to ensure that the skills and the competencies are passed on. But really what I was going to ask is, not in terms of denigrating anybody, I'm not into that mood at all. I'm saying this is more developmental in our approach. And if it is that you are saying in the CEO's report that you have, and I'm going to quote here, the company employs a rigorous recruitment and selection program. And clearly if you are saying that, and then you are presenting us with a training plan that really spans between January and September. That's what your training plan is. And the main I'm going to ask you a question about the training plan as well. And that's why I wanted you to tell us, on the basis of what you have, would you say that there was any significant investment, and I'm using that word purposely, in people, in the staff, in your human resource, over the period of 2015 to 2017? And I'm not seeing it here, and that's why I'm asking the question. It may have happened. You may not have recorded it. But I just want to ask whether you would have had significant investment, because that will advise me as to how I ask the other questions.
Mr. Chairman, you know, when we speak of the significant investment, you get into an organization in which critical roles were absent. And let's speak of some of those critical roles. The organization did not have anyone with any kind of training in finance. There was no one in the internal audit function, so internal audit was not done for years, okay? In terms of HR, there was no one with any significant HR training, okay? In terms of procurement, there was nothing in procurement. Procurement was, I know you, and you can deliver, I give you, the job to do. So that what could we have spent our time doing? First, we had to get the right kind of staff. And we spent time in seeking to get that level of staff. So we had to get a new HR manager. Well, not a new, we had to get an HR manager. We had to get an internal auditor. We had to get a chief financial. And beyond getting a chief financial, remember I indicated there was absolutely no one in this entire organization with any training in accounting. So we had to back up that person with an accountant who we felt was capable of even moving into the role of a CS.
You see, Mr. Chairman, you see where I'm heading? We have all of this natural resource. We have these quarries. We have this infrastructure. We may or may not have the kind of surveillance we expect. We're now recognizing that we had a deficiency in terms of the human capability. Then what do we expect to find in terms of the competitiveness of the organization and maximizing the profitability? And that's why I'm asking these questions, albeit to assist in terms of how do we move forward. So I want to ask, one of the things I noticed I did not see in your training plan is while you had the categories of employees, you did not have the beneficiaries, the individual names of the employees. That would have been something we would have liked to see to be able to analyze it properly. But I want to ask the question, how is it in this training plan you have submitted to us, and I have looked at it here, how is it have you arrived at a situation where you have a department which is very important to the entire operations of this organization, which is staffed by 2 persons in IT? Do you have one with 2 persons? Do you have that department with 2 persons? Or do you have only one? Or what do you have? What is this IT department stocked with? And I know that the IT department, I don't want to answer for you. I saw it on the org chart. I saw the unit, it comes under the divisional head. But you have 2 persons. One an officer and one an assistant. And I'll tell you where I'm heading with this. This is a very, we cannot talk, the permanent secretary is talking about drones and so on. This is a technologically driven society. It's a world. This is the new evolution. I'm seeing here people are going to altar. Are people aware what altar courses are for? What are altar courses for? Why do we send people to altar? We have a receptionist, and I don't want to personalize anything. I have come from a training background. These courses are very important, but do you know why you send people to altar? Anybody can answer?
Mr. Chairman, to be brutally honest, and you have pushed me to respond in that way,
yeah.
The percentage of people who can literally read and write and who are in significant positions in this organization, we have to be careful with it.
Yeah. Now, I just want to share something with you, right? I had started something called, it's really a workforce development unit within organizations. It is called the Workers' School. We can talk about that. That's not why we're here to question. I'm just suggesting that when something is done indigenously to an organization, it might have greater impact sometimes than when you bring persons who are not rudimentary to it. And therefore, the question I want to ask again is, are you aware? You must have been aware. But can you tell us how, within this period of training, your proposed plan, and I'm not saying it's proposed anymore, it seems to be in effect, because your first training was signed off on the 30th and the 31st of January for the HNS coordinator, who was sent to do what? Report writing. And I want to ask the question, tell us how many contracts for service in the IT field have been earmarked by one individual. Could you tell us? And if you don't, I will tell you. Let me help you there. Let me help. In this document that you submitted to us, outsourcing, basically in terms of Microsoft, computer literacy, and Excel is being outsourced to one person 49 times. One person. I am not, it is here, you know. One person, and I don't know who the person is, it is not important to me. I'm saying that in an organization where we're talking about austerity in the country, we want to utilize the capacity, we want to build the resource, it might be something you might want to look at. Because your budget, although you say it is less than 1% of the wages and so on, your budget for this period of time comes up to approximately $260,000 to $270,000. But what caught my attention here is not only the leadership skills that you talk about, and bringing in consultants to do that, but basic, you have 2 IT support persons, and you're outsourcing 49 times to a person to be sent for training. Did you give us any?
So the way the plan is built, right? The plan is built on a person, the skills gap, what the job description is required, and what we see as the necessary skills to be able to fill that job. So when you look at the individual gaps that needs to be closed, it may appear as though that person has been outsourced 29 times. But that could be 2 classes where we actually get people together.
No, hold on, let me just stop you.
And have classes around.
Hold on, let me just stop you. These are not classes. These are individual positions.
Correct.
That are sent to a person external to the organization.
Yes, but there's the assumption there that this is going to be one person going to one person going to one person going to one.
Yeah.
And that is not the way we envision that training being done. Where we envision that training being done is a person with the skills and capability to execute that training has the people whose names are listed with those gaps go through a session or two. So that may be a session of 20 people or a session of 25 people.
But it is not written like that.
But that's what I'm saying. So I'm just...
if you look at the months...
I'm just providing clarity.
Yeah, well, I think you'll need... You know what I'm just
Fair
indicating?
Enough.
You might want to review it.
Fair enough.
You might want to review it to maximize the presence of whoever it is.
Right, fair enough.
In the context. And if you are doing it that way...
Yes.
And you indicate it is external, then there's a difference in terms of an external provider as opposed to internally driven program.
Fair enough.
Or assistance. And I'm saying that you might want to look at it again to make sure that you have the best advantage.
Thank you.
Because one of the things you might want to look at as well is in terms of people going outside of the organization at various times and so on and locations when you might be able to do it in harmony.
Thank you.
I want to also, so now that we have more or less settled that and you might want to look at it, I want to also ask you to consider, and I don't know whether you have considered, maybe I should ask you the question. Have you considered at all assessing worker competencies on the work site for certification?
I would say that we have given it some thought, more from a mentoring perspective, as the chairman spoke about, having people who are skilled work with the people who are developing. But in terms of having a process by which we actually do a skills gap assessment on the site, no, we have thought about it, but we don't have a system in place to be able to do that.
Okay, I will suggest to you afterwards, but I think it's something that you can utilize to your maximum, especially in terms of the transfer of learning. It is called the accreditation of prior learning,
Great.
Sometimes called the prior learning accreditation and recognition process. I want to go on to the aspect of industrial relations and legal matters, because I listened to the chairman when he indicated that there was a deficit in terms of the human resource capability, not necessarily in terms of who the person was or would have been and so on. But could you tell us what legal matters do you have before you now, in terms of personnel and in terms of contractors? If you have those, and what's the reasons for it, if it's in the case of contractors, and if you could give us a status in terms of the current position.
Mr. Chairman, we had provided a list of the legal matters.
I saw some of the...
Yeah, all right. From an IR perspective, some of the matters are outstanding for, prior to our time. Some have arisen during our time, but I wasn't sure, what...
But do you have anybody who has sued the company? Do you have any litigation matters against the company?
Yes, we have.
By contractors?
No, if a contractor sued me, not necessarily be an IR matter.
No, not IR. In terms of any corporate responsibility.
Oh yes, oh yes.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we have some of those.
Could you give us an idea as to how many and the value of it?
And this is just a rough from what we do. In fact, have legal matters that range into between, I would say $7 and maybe $12 million. Okay.
I would ask the chairman to not. I don't want it to hazard, I guess, on these legal issues. Yeah. If you could provide that information to the committee in writing, because we want to have proper information when we're making our deliberations. We appreciate that you're trying to give us, I guess, but the committee's reference to make sure we have accurate information as far as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, because we do have the accurate figures.
Both ways, you could give it to us.
We certainly would provide that in writing.
Okay, I have MP Leons. Forgive me, MP. I want to allow my good colleague, MP Leons, to go ahead of the brigadier. Brigadier, retired. You have the floor.
Good morning. I want to address the issue of security as it pertains in the industry. National Quarries stated in its previous time here with us that they had an MOU with the Defense Force in terms of security of the facilities. Excuse me. and I want to address the Ministry of Energy. Is there any sort of arrangement with the Mineral Division in the ministry in respect to personnel of the ministry? I know that there's some challenges in terms of personnel going out in the field. Is there any such arrangement in part with the Ministry of National Security, ministry to ministry, as the National Quarries are attempting to do in terms of security of your personnel going out into the field?
Yes, member, to answer your question, yes, there is. In fact, as the director indicated, we have ongoing arrangements with respect to not just the surveillance with regard to licensed or active areas, but also as well with respect to responding to reports of illegal quarrying that would come from the members of the public. So in those arrangements, what we typically do is we have an arrangement where involving members of the protective services, and I keep it broad because there are various entities within both the police service and the defense force that we can rely on in order to assist us and to accompany us, in fact, when we make visits to sites that may have some particular security concerns.
And to date, how are these arrangements working?
It's an ongoing exercise. It has gone through some periods where the response has had its challenges in terms of these other agencies also being involved in other activities that may conflict at times in terms of the schedules. But we've been trying to ensure that we coordinate. In fact, we've had a series of meetings quite recently where a system is now currently in place, which would redound to the benefit of ensuring that there's active communication, quick response time to be able to respond to some of these things.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of questions regarding some issues, some items in your submission here. I see one of your ongoing objectives is to continue efforts at acquiring a CEC. Where is that, and how long has that been outstanding? Because we try to operate in a place where all entities operating in the sector follow the rules and the law, and this is a state company. So I see that you're continuing efforts. What is going on with that? Could you help us?
Mr. Chairman, to get your mining license, you have to get a CC. You have to have a mining plan. You need to have, several different things, with the CC being fundamental to the whole process. As you're aware, once you're doing a certificate of environmental clearance, it requires you to bring in experts who would, do the work for you, conduct the meetings with stakeholders, etc. What we have found is that in following the process to go out and get firms to deliver that for us, it took us a while, and when we got the information, because they submitted based on the requirements, one of the issues for us as a company that maybe other companies that don't have that issue is the cost of doing this thing. So that we went out and recognized, wait, we do not have the ability to fund this right now. So what we said is, can we do this in what we might call phases, which is where we are at the moment. So that up to last week, we had an additional provider come in to tell us, look, how can you do it and what cost can you do it at so that we can get the process going. And to me, as I explained to Senior Counsel this morning, we are in total agreement with the law as it's stated, but getting through those parts of it, because getting a certificate of environmental clearance is not going to take 3 months. It can take up to a year and a half. And that is where we have the challenge, because Once we can get the contractors in, we cannot push the other agencies to be able to deliver fast for us. And this is why one of the things we had asked the former minister is, can you give us provisional, knowing that we had, and let us go through this process so that we can get this thing done.
All right. Thank you for that update. I have a couple of more questions, more with in terms of the operations of the company. Now, I've looked at some of the documentation that's supplied here. It seems that the company is operating on a monthly loss in the region of $700,000. Now, I know you indicated that you're not getting a subvention from the government, but operating on a almost $750,000 monthly loss is difficult to sustain for any extended period. So I'm trying to understand what is the plan, what is the thinking here to try to turn that around, because I've looked at some of your cash balances at the bank and it's tight. So the concern as a member from the side of this committee is the sustainability, the viability of the business. We don't want you to end up as with some other entities in places where people are moving in to take assets. So those things are topical, and it's obviously a concern. You're not able to sustain your current operation costs. You're running at a monthly loss, and we need to just try to get from you what is the plan to try to make sure you don't end up in a place where your equipment is held by a bailiff. Yeah?
Mr. Chairman, that is something that my CEO addresses on a daily basis along with the CFO. And we have taken some specific decisions and actions, and I'm going to pass over to the CEO, and he will explain to you some of the processes, some of the targets that we set for a daily basis, and also how we monitor our costs and manage our costs. So I'll pass to my CEO, who will also influence with the CFO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you're right, looking at the numbers, they could be discouraging at times. But we've taken a very hard look at efficiencies in the business. And our key focus over the last 3 months has been on our direct operating cost and looking for opportunities to be able to drive that direct operating cost down. We have succeeded in reducing that cost by close to about 20% since we met it. And it has been done by looking and measuring some clear metrics around cost of mining, cost of haulage, all the operational cost. Where we are finding ourselves over the last 2 to 3 months is that we are starting to get to the point where we are almost breaking even. Right? We started to get to the point where we are almost breaking even, to the point where losses are now somewhere in the region of between $150,000 and $200,000 a month. Our projection is that once we have the limestone division up and running, we should be able to cross that hurdle to get back into the black, I would say, over the next 2 or 3 months. But the approach has been to take inefficiencies out of the system, focus on direct operating cost, and be able to manage that on a day-to-day basis. And can I just let the CFO say 1 or 2 words around how we do that on a daily basis?
So one of the things that we did was we looked at the operating costs, as the CFO mentioned, and we realized that in order to cover that cost, we have to do a certain number of activities on a daily basis, which we continue to monitor on a daily basis. We know what our revenue is, or should be, in order to cover that cost, and again, we track that every single day. What we did as well is we know what it costs us to produce a ton of aggregate. I'm not sure if that information existed in the company before. So looking at that type of information and those metrics, we have been able to reduce that $700,000 average that you mentioned before down to in the vicinity of $100,000 and $200,000 right now. And if we continue on that trajectory, within 3 to 6 months, we should be able to make the company profitable.
Mr. Stephen, you said a very important word that is magic to my ear. It's called metrics. If you can't measure something, you don't know what you're doing. You have to be able to apply metrics and measure. So it's music to my ear, because that means that someone somewhere is applying some rigor to what you're doing. If you don't apply the rigor, then you will always run into difficulties. I just have a quick follow-up question because, again, I am in the details here, and I'm looking at your operational, your unit cost. You mentioned unit cost of production, and what I found interesting here is that when you're over the period of time provided in the data you sent us, when you ramp up your production levels, there's the unit cost of production drops. So if I look at some of the data here, if your production doubles from 1 month to the next, you find that your unit cost of production only goes down by about 10 to 15%, which suggests that there's a high fixed cost or high fixed element in your unit cost operations. Forgive me, I like to look at numbers, so that is a challenge for you operationally, because if you double production but your unit cost goes down by 15 or 20%, then the only real savior for you there is to keep running flat out, because when you in months when you have lower production, your unit cost is just not, almost not sustainable. Is this something you've looked at?
Yes, we looked at it from several perspectives. And some of the key metrics that Glenn spoke about that we measure every day is gravel grade. So if we have good gravel grade, 75% and above, then the cost of processing per unit drops.
Yeah.
So we have been focusing on keeping that gravel grade above 75%. The next area of focus is our haulage and our ability to maximize our haulage potential on a day-to-day basis. Once we are maximizing our haulage potential on a day-to-day basis, our unit cost drops. And the third major part of that unit cost is capping. So how we actually cap those reservoirs after we extract from them is also another critical part. Those three metrics are probably what you would say are your high overheads in our mining costs. And we pay detailed attention to it, to the point where we look at costs equipment by equipment, day to day, to be able to see what should be utilized and what shouldn't be utilized. And that's actually starting to drive the efficiency and more creative ways of doing the work.
Well, as a member of this committee, I'm pleased to hear that someone is looking at this, because at the end of the day, we can talk about the policy and the strategy and dealing with all the engagement issues, but operationally, we need to fix the operations of National Quarries.
Absolutely.
And in order to do that, somebody has to go in there and fix, or at least take a hard look and pull out some of these numbers and understand exactly where the company has challenges and deal with those issues frontally. So I appreciate your response, because it sounds good in my ear, because I look at these numbers and I get concerned, but I appreciate the response. The response is the response that I was more or less expecting to hear. I give the floor now to Senator Mark.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to address this question to the Permanent Secretary and also the Chairman of National Quarries. Now, you know, in Paris, just a couple years ago, I think about a year and a half ago or two, the world signed up to what is called the Paris Climate Agreement. And the whole question of the environment featured very prominently within that framework. We know the quarry industry is very, you could put it as a polluter of the environment if certain protective measures are not taken to ensure the sustainable nature of our surroundings. I want to ask, in the case of the National Quarries, do you have silt traps to address your waste water? Because, you know, if you don't have silt traps to address your waste water, it would begin to drain into the rivers. The rivers become clogged, and the aquifers are starved. And therefore, the question that I'm asking is how are we addressing waste water coming from the plant, clogging the rivers, starving the aquifers, damaging the environment, killing fishes, damaging plants? Have we been able at the National Quarries to take measures to ensure? Because I understand you have two major rivers, small La Saiva, large La Saiva, and both are polluted or have some element of pollution. So the question here is, what steps have been taken by National Quarries to address the environment? That is very critical, particularly in terms of rehabilitation as well.
Mr. Chairman, I will allow the Chief Operating Officer to tell you that National Quarries, we're not just about mining. We are also concerned about the environment, and that's why our Chief Operating Officer will show you the difference in terms of how this national company operates.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, we operate under ISO 14000 protocols, which deals specifically with environmental management. And we have in fact been recertified under those protocols. With regard to the sand and gravel division, we operate a closed-loop recycling system for wastewater. And internally, we monitor the outfalls to the natural watercourses on a periodic basis, on a quarterly basis. That is also backstopped by monitoring from the EMA, who independently tests the natural watercourses insofar as the outfalls from our site. And consistently, we meet the requirements of the EMA. With regard to our limestone division, what we have is retention ponds for the water that flows across our quarry site and then exits into the Arima Branches River. And again, based on our internal testing and the external testing, we do in fact meet standards. So we are very mindful of the impact of quarrying on the natural watercourses, and we do our very best to ensure that we do not have a negative impact on those watercourses. Having said that, and particularly, really in relation to both sites, there are other operators that are in close proximity to our sites. We do not have control over what those other operators do. With regard to the sand and gravel site, there's also the prevalence and presence of periodic illegal activities, which may in fact have impacts on the natural watercourses.
Well, maybe I can ask Mr. Lashley the following question. The CEO said that operators that function nearby, adjacent to national quarries, they have obviously no control over them. And you did make mention in your contribution a short while ago the impact that you take on board when you are granting licenses would, among other things, look at the aquifers as an example, and of course the rivers to ensure that it's kept reasonably clean, the potable water supply. Is the ministry engaged in any national assessment to determine the impact on the aquifers, the potable water supply, rivers, the environment, that quarry operators could be bringing to bear on these very delicate areas of the environment? Have you been able to proceed along that line to do a proper national assessment?
Yes. I'll let the director treat with some specific issues, but certainly it's an area that is of high concern at the level of the Minerals Advisory Committee, in which a lot of the other agencies who have primary responsibility for some of these things as well, the Water Resources Agency, the EMA, they are members of the committee, so that whenever a matter, an application comes before the committee, it is of paramount importance that, in fact, any permission granted or any sort of license arrangement, all of the requirements that support and inform the manner in which an operation will be conducted will have to conform to all the requirements. So having said that, I'll pass you on to the director to treat with any sort of programs that are currently in place with respect to monitoring and enforcing some of the guidelines that were issued. Yeah.
I was asking specifically whether the ministry has conducted, maybe with other agencies, because you have a Mineral Advisory Council or Board, as you mentioned, any national assessment, given the widespread degradation, widespread degradation of our environment. Then you also have the denuding of the hills side. You have the impact on the rivers. You have the threats posed to the aquifers and the rivers and so on. Is the ministry considering conducting or seeking to have another agency conduct a national assessment on the environment, given the almost illegal criminal behavior exhibited thus far by these operators who are deemed illegal and the impact they are having on our environment? And therefore the population needs to know what are the consequences of their illegal operations, and therefore what measures we have to take as a nation to safeguard our environment. That is what the point is making before you put it on to him.
Before I pass you to the director, in terms of an assessment of environmental impact, the point I was making is that the primary responsibility and the focal point for any sort of assessment like that would lie with the environmental agencies. We, of course, would partner and support. So, for instance, quite recently, there has been discussion around a study within the Gulf of Paria with respect to activities, and not just from quarrying or from the petroleum industry, farming industries in terms of their outfalls into the system and how that impacts overall on the ecosystems and the quality of the water courses, the marine environment, and the rivers and streams that flow into it. So certainly the ministry is part of those discussions, and we would continue to support and be part of any national exercise that would take a comprehensive look at the contributing elements to those things and how, in fact, we can mitigate any sort of activities that contributed. But I'll pass you on to the director just to treat with some of the day-to-day.
Thank you, Pierce. Chairman, as Pierce indicated, the lead agency responsible for the environment and environmental matters is the Environmental Management Authority, which is now under the Ministry of Planning and Development. We have in the past, we have not specifically initiated any studies with respect to rivers, but the Water Resources Agency and the Water and Sewage Authority, WASA, had a program called Adopt a River, which they led and which the Ministry of Energy, Minerals Division, with respect to the quarries, was a part of, that looked at the health of the rivers and the situation with rivers in general in the country, and the impacts that industrial activity, agriculture, or other types of activities are having on rivers. And it included the impacts that quarries were having on rivers. So there is a program in that agency that I was aware of. The Environmental Management Authority also does their State of the Environment report every so often, where they look at various aspects and impacts on the environment. And we collaborate with them to provide information, and we work closely with them. As part of the licensing process, an application comes to the Minerals Advisory Committee, and sitting on that committee, representatives from WASA and the EMA, among others, very senior officers from those agencies. And when an application is reviewed for the grant of a license, consideration is given to the impacts on the aquifers, the impacts on the environment, and all the various issues associated with denudation of the environment and natural systems. So we are working closely with these agencies that has the lead on these matters.
May I ask Mr. the Chairman of National Quarries, whether you could provide us with a detailed breakdown. I'm dealing with the human resource element of your operation. I have noted that you have about 81 employees. You don't have to reply. You can submit in writing for us. First of all, can we have a detailed breakdown by categories, qualification, and salaries of and years of service of those 181 employees? Would you be kind enough also to advise us how many of those employees, do you have a collective agreement? There's a trade union representing workers there. What's the name of the trade union?
It's the OWT.
Right. So you have a collective agreement. Could you supply us, Mr. Chairman, with, since you assumed chairmanship of National Quarries, how many new employees have been engaged? Again, could you give us a detailed breakdown in terms of categories, salary levels, salary levels, qualification? Because I think one of the points that you were making, and I think Mr. Fazal Karim was making, in terms of the need for upgrading your human resource base, and you yourself admitted that you do have a challenge at this time with the quality of your labor force at this time. So maybe efficiency levels can be addressed when we look at your overall breakdown as it relates to your workforce. So if you could supply us with those pieces of data in writing, I would appreciate that very much. And my final question, as I said, put that in writing for us. You don't have to respond at this time. My final question goes back to the mineral division, and I go to the director and maybe the permanent secretary. Again, you can supply us in writing, and you can give us a tight position as I outline the areas of concern. First of all, could you outline to this committee the company's organizational structure with the following details? 1, we would like to find out the total establishment of each department, categorized by contracted and permanent staff. We'd like to find out the number of positions that are filled and the number of positions that are vacant in the minerals division. We would like to find out how does the minerals division ensure that employees possess the required skills and or competencies. We would also like to find out what are some of the challenges being faced by the minerals division, and also what strategies are in place to alleviate some of these challenges. Because as I said to you, Mr. Lashley, and your director, we are here to try to help the ministry as a regulator, and of course the National Quarries as a company, to improve and increase your levels of efficiency, efficacy, economy, and effectiveness overall. So these are some of the concerns I would like to have submitted on behalf of the committee to the chairman, so that we can be able to proffer the appropriate recommendations when we do our findings to strengthen the operations not only of National Quarries, but of course your ministry, which we realize, is facing some challenges, but we are here to help you.
And Mr. Lashley, also in that submission, if the ministry has any current thinking about what types of staff or what numbers are required to really deliver, if the ministry has any current thinking, that would help us, because we would look at it and be able to notionally say it looks good or it looks under-resourced. But from where you sit, given the experience I know that you have in the ministry, and understanding the challenges that the ministry has had in administering this sector, not for last year, but for the past 25, 30 years, it's been a challenge. So that if you have any thoughts about what could be done in terms of resourcing the ministry, or the unit in the ministry to do that work effectively, the committee would be happy to receive your current thinking on that. All right? I would now give MP Karim, we're about to wrap up, so I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to ask one or two short questions before we wind up. We've essentially run out of time, but I know you've had a request in for questions for some time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Basically, very briefly, I just want to follow up on my colleague's questions, Mr. Mark, to ask you to put in writing for us and to indicate how did you arrive at the one individual who was contracted for 49 occasions for IT training, and secondly, there's one particular training provider, and you'll notice it from your plan, who has been contracted for over 30 occasions for a certain type of training within the organization. So an individual and also a training provider. Thirdly, we would have heard this morning in terms of your challenge for profitability. If you can answer, or if you'd like to put it in writing too, but maybe you can give us a sense as to briefly what are your plans, given the time constraint, in terms of your sustainability of the organization, and if that includes any element of diversification.
Just quickly, Mr. Chairman, with respect to diversification, the National Quarries Company, we are sticking to our knitting. In other words, we are a mining and quarrying business, which is where we're going. In terms of efficiency, we have areas in which we believe, because of plant capacity and all of that, we need to address those. And so that is the reason why we went into the crushing contract, which was something that was advertised nationally. In terms of further efficiency, we felt that the only way you can get the best price on everything is that there must be competitive tendering. And that's the reason why we went through an extensive process of having the suppliers pre-qualified, and then when they're pre-qualified, then they can bid. That has given us already, for our larger contracts, reduced prices on some of what we are seeing. And the final area in terms of our competitiveness, the issue of looking at our costs on our daily basis. In the energy sector, where I came from, we used to talk about 50 cents per barrel. We now have that conversation taking place here because we know what is the cost per ton of product with everything included. And every day what we seek to do is bring that down. So each time I call my CEO on a morning, he can tell me what was the cost we delivered at. That is the way.
Given the downturn in the construction sector, do you have any ideas as to, or any plans as to what you're going to do with this excess capacity that you have on your hand?
The capacity that we are dealing with right now is to deliver for the planned program of the government. As we said before, what we have done is we have kept very close contact with the implementers of government's program. And what we did is we took what we would call a realistic view with respect to what we can deliver, as distinct from saying, well, Pure says they're going to need X amount, and we will deliver all of Pure. We are not the only player in the game. We have taken a percentage of what we can deliver. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I will now, as I begin to close this hearing, this inquiry, I would like to call on firstly the Chairman of National Quarries, and then followed by the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Energy, to give us a few brief closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The National Quarries Company Limited is going through a significant transformation. Some of the things that we ask of the committee is to assist us as we continue to treat with some of the issues that we have addressed here, and we certainly believe that we will get that help from you. So we want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to assist us. One of the areas, of course, is as we work through our CEC to get that license. The process takes too long, and we believe that if something can be done to address that, then we would be in a better place. A year and a half is just too long for us to get those things in place. Thank you.
Noted. Mr. Lashley.
Thank you, Chair. I want to again thank the committee for a very insightful session this morning in terms of pointing out and raising issues that we will certainly be looking into. We appreciate, of course, as usual, your promise of support for moving forward on a number of these items to the extent that we require the support from within the Parliament. Certainly, as a company, National Quarries is a fundamental, it's a cornerstone for a lot of the projects, infrastructure projects that the government is seeking to implement. So we certainly want to ensure that they are poised to deliver as they want to do in terms of providing the supply of materials in an efficient manner going forward to support the national effort. So again, thanks again to all members of the committee. And on behalf of my team, I just want to give you the assurance that we will continue to provide whatever information you require.
And as I begin to close, I want to, on behalf of the committee, we want to put on the record the committee's appreciation for the fullness of the responses. Some of the responses were, I think, quote unquote, brutally honest. And the committee appreciates that because in order for us to get the work done, we need the fullest responses possible. And we appreciate the fullness of the responses both from the ministry team and from the National Quarries team. And it will help us to be able to help you. So as I begin to close, I want to thank all members of the viewing and listening audience and all the members of the media. And I want to thank again the representatives of the Ministry of Energy and National Quarries for coming to share time with us. I want to thank my committee members for their usual hard work and diligence in being prepared to be here. And I now say that this meeting is now suspended. Thank you very much.